So on today's video, I thought I'd talk to you about the Floor 81 Compilation LP. Oh dear. So pretty early on in doing Boss Tuneage, I decided I really wanted to do a compilation LP of all these great new bands that were appearing behind the likes of Snuff, HDQ, etc, etc. And obviously doing my fanzine at the time, I was interviewing a lot of these bands and getting to know them. So I started to plan Floor 81, I think probably in the summer of 1990, and bearing in mind the Floor 81 LP only finally came out in May 1992, so it was a very long process. I guess what you have to remember is back in the day, whereas like now if you were doing a compilation LP you'd just email bands, get the digital file over, put it together on your computer and voila, there you go. It was a lot more involved. Back in 1990, you couldn't do that. So bands would have to send you in either a DAT tape or quarter-inch, and both formats were being used, and then you'd have to book a studio to actually compile it all together, and it would be a day's studio time. So it wasn't an easy thing to do. So obviously with my naivety, I thought this could be put together really quickly and it would be great and it'd be a snapshot of the scene, it'd be fantastic, etc, etc. So I started approaching bands, and the one thing that I'd kind of totally misjudged was how long it was going to take for not only the bands to come back to me to say yes, we'll be on the thing, but how long it would also take them to then get the masters to me. Because obviously for a band it wasn't a simple thing, you know. Most bands at the time would go into the studio, get the mix down either on a DAT tape or a quarter-inch, and that was it. They didn't have spare copies, they didn't pay for spare copies. So if you wanted to have a track from a band on your comp LP, they either had to go to the studio themselves to get a duplicate made or give you the original. And a lot of bands didn't want you obviously having the original of their master. The other thing to bear in mind as well is that a lot of the pressing plants at that time where this stuff was being sent over to never sent back the masters. So lots of those releases at that time, the records would come back, no master. So the master was gone. So it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. So I approached loads and loads of different bands. Some came back to me, some said, oh yeah, we'll do it, and then I never heard back from them. Others sent me bits through, and it just seemed to take an inordinate amount of time. I had it in my head that what I wanted to do with this comp LP was actually have like a 20 band comp, because I worked out that you could get nearly half an hour on the side of a record. It would sound like shit, but you could fit about half an hour. So I thought, that's 60 minutes. I'll do a 60-minute comp LP, get as many bands on it as possible. And I asked each band to actually do me a page A4 of artwork, because I wanted to actually have a 20 or 24 page booklet in the comp LP as well. So each band had a page, you know, for their stuff. And of course that also created delays, because some bands sent masters but no artwork. Some never even bothered ever doing artwork, so that all got jettisoned aside in the end. But obviously there was a lot of things happening as well. So I mean, this was still going on in 1991, me chasing up bands, you know, and obviously Truck Off, the Goo Patrol album, was Boss Tuneage 004, and that came out I think in sort of March, April 1991. And the idea was Floor 81 be the next release. As it was, Wordbug then got in touch with me about doing an album, and that became more of a priority, so that came out before it in like September. Also in September 1991 I left home and went to university in Leicester. So all of a sudden I was doing the label long distance and sort of doing stuff when I'd come back at weekends from being at university. So everything started to take longer and longer and longer, and I remember thinking, I'm waiting for these bands to send me stuff in, and I could be waiting forever, and there's got to be a cut-off, you know, we've got to get this out. So in the end I booked in to compile the LP at White House Studios in Aston in Leicester, which was just down the road from where I was living as a student at the time. But obviously being a student, my funds were really limited, so I was really struggling to get the money together for this record. I was still waiting for money back from the previous 5 releases on the label. And so I was sort of scrimping and saving just for the studio time, let alone getting the records actually pressed. So in the end, I do have to thank the government really for getting Floor 81 out, because it was this wonderful thing called a student loan that part financed putting the record out. So I used my student loan to press that record. So I decided to not bother with the lyric booklet, and instead we had like a little A4 folded photocopied sheet with some a brief paragraph about each band. Now unfortunately, I printed those on a photocopier about 2 months before I compiled the LP. So if you do have a copy of this album and you've got a copy of the little lyric insert that was put into it, the info insert that was put in there, you will notice that I refer to certain tracks by certain bands which have no resemblance to the track that is actually on the LP. And this is because various bands told me, oh yeah, we want to use this song and we're sending you the DAT tape. And then the studio had sent completely another song. So I think like Sleep, we were going to have Running on the Spot is on there. And I think I mentioned in the lyric insert, yeah, Running on the Spot is by Sleep and all this. But it's back to square one that's actually on the LP. Likewise with Sofahead, they'd done me this Ian had spent this time, an Ian Armstrong artwork special, had done a lyric sheet for Tired, their song Tired, and that was what was going to be on their version. When the DAT tape arrived, it had Make It Worse on it. So even the artwork I had was not relevant to what was on the record. So anyway, so I went to this White House Studios in Syston for the day, and then obviously all these sort of little bits were being discovered as and when we went through in the order that I had the bands planned. Because I'd already sequenced it in my own head, how I wanted it to be, etc. And then we started discovering that we'd got sort of different stuff to what we thought we had. So I do remember that most of the bands sent like DAT tapes and quarter inch, but there was a French band on there called Les Imbibes, the Drunks, who'd sent one. And normally quarter inch tapes ran at 15 inches per second. But they'd sent a master that was 30 inches per second, and White House couldn't play it. So in the end, it involved this convoluted process of him, I think, playing the 30 inch per second tape at 7.5 inches per second, recording it to DAT, recording it back onto tape, and then so it was then at 15 inches per second, so it played at the right speed. And I remember this took like hours. And I'd sort of booked in for a half day, and it ended up being a full day. So all of a sudden, the compiling costs had gone up as well. But if you think about it, I only compiled the record in February 1992. So this had been going on in the background for a good 18 months. The other problem by that point is obviously a lot of the bands had actually split up, or it was like songs from their first demo. Like Wordbug is a prime example. It's Mountains Too Many of You's the last track on the Comp LP, and that was from their first demo, which I think was recorded in like November 1990. And they'd already had an album out for 6 months at that point of later songs. So a lot of it was it was hopelessly out of date. And but it thought like, well, we got to get it out now. We need to do it. And I'd agreed with every band that appeared, that for their royalties, I'd send them 10 copies of the Comp LP, and that was like their royalties. So with 20 bands on, that was 200 copies. So I couldn't even work it out to do 500, and spend a little bit less, because with what I'd have left after I'd sent out promos and the band copies, there wasn't enough. I couldn't sell enough to cover the costs of it. So we had to do 1,000, and they were a hard sell because obviously, this was already out of date. A lot of I wanted to get a mix of sort of established bands and new bands, and the problem was a lot of those bands had either split up, or the established bands weren't as established as perhaps I thought they'd be. I thought this one would just fly out, and we changed distributors by that time because Plastic Head had started doing export for us, and SRD had been doing the UK. And I remember Plastic Head persuaded me, oh, you need to get us to do the UK as well, we'll sell hundreds of this. And lo and behold, I gave it all to them, and they didn't sell hundreds of it. So anyway, on other bits with the album, Floor 81, where does the name Floor 81 come from? So remember, I was sort of like 17, 18 when I was compiling this. And I happened to be watching at home when I should have been doing revision, The Towering Inferno, that old 1970s disaster movie. If you know that film, the fire in the Towering Inferno actually starts on floor 81. And I sort of thought this was really great. This was like symbolic of like, these are all these new bands, it's going to be this great erupting scene. It's like, so that, yeah, it's all a bit stupid, to be honest with you, in hindsight, but that's why it's called floor 81. So my original idea for the artwork for floor 81 was that I wanted to have a video still from the Towering Inferno, from the scenes where there's the fires breaking out and the helicopters flying over, and we do a screen video grab of that, and that proved to be impossible. One, also I was worried that I didn't have rights to actually do that, and I'd probably get MGM and Universal, whoever had made the film, suing me. So we thought, well, we're going to have to try to recreate that in some way. And my friend Matt was a photography student. And of course we were living in rural flat Lincolnshire, which is not renowned for having many high-rise tower blocks. So I remember we got in the car and we drove to Lincoln, and driving to Lincoln was probably like an hour's trip then, because we were about 40 miles away from there. So we drove across to Lincoln and we just headed for the biggest building we could see in Lincoln, the biggest tower block. And so we went to this place called Trent View in Lincoln. And I mean, it didn't have 81 floors, put it like that. I think it had about 10 floors. So I think rather than floor 81, it's probably floor 8 is more appropriate. So Matt took a couple of photos, and he took a couple of photos of me stood outside it. And for reasons best known to myself, and I still don't know to this day how I got persuaded to do this, but we put a picture of me on the back cover, and I cringe now at saying that, but please bear in mind I was 19, probably trying to impress a girl or something who probably was very unimpressed, unsurprisingly. And yeah, so it sort of came together from that. So the cover is kind of the best we could do with what we had available. My old friend David Goodchild from Wordbug Annalise, he was kind of a keen graphic designer, so he actually did all the typesetting for me and did that. He also was the one who designed the Inksplat logo for Boss Tuneage later on. So I probably should get a copy of the record and just show you it, shouldn't I, really? Yeah. So here is the cover of Floor 81 in all its glory. See, not too bad, you know, that's passable, isn't it? You know, it wasn't too bad. So we had all the band names at the bottom and the picture of the highest tower block in Lincoln there, on Floor 8 rather than 81. But then unfortunately there was the back cover where, oh dear, what was I thinking? Yeah, so I remember one fanzine, I got so much stick for this, by the way. So much stick you don't believe. I remember one fanzine said, who knew it was me, said it was Lincolnshire's ugliest male model next to Spilsby's highest tower block or something like that. But yeah, it is what it is. It is what it is. So you can see we didn't actually have a proper logo still at that time. We were just doing silly writing that I thought looked neat. And yeah, so this was the album. So if I go through some of the bands on here, and I can tell you little stories probably about that. So first track on side A was Sink, and that was a song called Amanush, but not how it's spelled on the back of this cover. Because again, Ed sent me up a DAT tape which didn't have any writing on it. So I called Ed up and said, oh, what's the song? Because it was an outtake from their album they did for City Slang. And he said, oh, it's called Amanush. And I decided that's how you spell Amanush, which I then discovered when the record came back is not how you spell Amanush. And even second song, What Tyler, Visions. And that's because I'd spoken to Sean on the phone, and they'd also sent me a DAT tape that just had Visions written on the DAT tape inlay, but I remembered that it was called something else, but I couldn't remember what. So I put Visions on here to remind me that I needed to find out from Sean what the actual full title was. And the full title was Visions of the Daughters of Albion. But it ended up as Visions. Track 3 was Gan, I Saw You Yesterday. That was from their first demo. The lineup had changed and they'd had an album out, I think, by the time this came out. Track 4, Wanton Thought Lost, recorded at the same time as the 7-inch, so back in late 1990. So by the time this came out in 1992, they'd been split up for nearly a year. Love Junk was from their first demo, or their second demo. They'd already got 12 inches out and stuff. Yardman was one of Ed's side projects, and they were going to do an album on Full Circle, and this was an outtake from that album, a track called Headstands. And that album never came out. I think all the other songs came out on various 7 inches, possibly at a much later date. Next track, Brucey's Chin from Scunthorpe. Now, I discovered Brucey's Chin through, there's a guy called Steve Midwinter who used to put gigs on in Scunthorpe, and he did a benefit comp tape, which was all desk recordings from Scunthorpe Queen's Hall, where they put the gigs on, called Off With Their Heads, I think it was called. And on there was this band called Brucey's Chin, and they sounded really funny, really funny. So I remember I managed to track down via Steve the band, and they actually went into the studio especially to record some songs, because they were just a joke, piss around band that was first band on a lot of the Scunthorpe gigs, from what I can tell. And so they wanted to put Tarby Tadger Waltz on there, but unfortunately I wanted one of their other songs. Really, I want them to do Lemon Fresh, which was made me laugh. But Tarby Tadger Waltz was on there, and it stands out like a sore thumb on that side A, and probably everyone's thinking, what on earth is this? But I liked it. It had a bit of the Half Man Half Biscuit about it, and I think I've said before I was a bit of a Half Man Half Biscuit fan back in the day. Track 8, Since the Operation, Shitting Idols, and that was a guy called Blakey. Was in Since the Operation, and he was a mate of Guru Patrol's who I met when Guru Patrol and Vehicle Derek and Damage played at the Huddersfield Wharf, and he hung around with us for the day, I think, for the next gig in Bradford. So we got talking, and really nicely sent me like some other Since the Operation tracks. They'd done a split 7-inch on his own label with a band called Thought Police, and so I really liked it, so I asked them to go on there, so they went on there as well. Juice, Fundamental, that was Aidan's band Juice, and Aidan used to put on gigs down in London for Goo Patrol. He also helped out with Lookout in those days, so a lot of the early Lookout bands, when they came over and toured, Aidan was involved in that. And Fundamental was the demo version, and then I think it was re-recorded for a 12-inch on Wretch Records, if my memory serves me right. And the final track on side A was Elmer Hassel, and that was from their first demo, Suffocating. Again, I think they possibly had their 12-inch out on Vinyl Japan by the time this actually materialised. Right, heading over to side B, if you're still awake. Sleep, obviously I think I said before, it should have been running on the spot from their demo, and it ended up being Back to Square One, which again is on the Cat and Mouse album, and this is the demo version of that. Exit Condition, great band from Stoke obviously, and 10,000 Lights is the recording, I think, from their first attempt at recording their album. They did do a version of Days of Wild Skies. They recorded an album prior to that, which was shelved, and a lot of that's never come out, and I don't think Richard wants it to come out, to be honest with you. Track 3 was Les MBB, as I say, the band from France with their 30 inches per second master tape, which caused me all manner of headaches. Trench Fever were track 4, and it was a track called In Time, which they recorded, I think it was from their second demo, so that went on there. Frogs of War from Huddersfield, they put out a cracking mini album on Full Circle. Used to see them a lot. I used to go across to Huddersfield for gigs at the Wharf or the Top Spot Snooker Club. That's where I saw Green Day's first ever gig, actually. That's another story for another day. So Waves Of by them, which was from the demo they did after all the Said and Done mini album. Blind Justice were a band who used to send me demo tapes, and I'd interviewed in the fanzine. They were from, I think, Merthyr Tydfil way. So X-Ray Vision was from that. They were planning to do an album for Full Circle that never happened. Then Deformity from Bedfordshire, who I think were originally called Twerp, who I think were on a Looney Tunes 7-inch. And they got recommended to me from Mike, who was in Meatfly, who was doing a label called Sycophant Records. Because I'd asked like Meatfly, Force Fed and bands like that, from Nottingham, Fudge Tunnel, if they wanted to be on the comp, and I think none of them were available or wanted to. And he recommended me speaking to this guy called Leighton from Deformity, and they sent me through, and we put on Thalidomide Child, which I think is also Twerp recorded on a 7-inch, unbeknownst to me, a couple of years earlier. Then the penultimate song was Sofa Head, where obviously it should have been Tired, but it was actually a version of Make It Worse, which is the first song on What a Predicament, but this is a different version of that to what's on there. And last track was Wordbug with Mountains Too Many of You from their first demo, and I have to be honest that Ed has basically said, please, whatever you do, never ever reissue Floor 81, because I hate that song. So that's why it's never been reissued either. But yeah, there were lots of bands that should have been on this: Flame On, Adversary, Hysterics. I could list loads of bands that I sort of requested to go on there that for one reason or another it didn't. So it is what it is. It's a little sound capsule of the time. I remember that Stephen Wells reviewed it from the NME, and I think he was kind of took pity on me a bit, and it was quite a good thing. He did actually pull up that some of the paragraphs and descriptions of the bands that I'd put in on this lyric sheet were actually inadvertently funny. I think Deformity was the one he pulled out, where I'd basically put that Deformity do a great line in cover versions. They do Duran Duran's Rio and You Sexy Thing by Hot Chocolate, but it's one of their own songs, The Lidomide Child, that appears on this record. And obviously, you know, comedy gold, but I just didn't realise it at the time. So yeah, that's where it is. I mean, like I say, it didn't sell as well as I thought, probably because it was out of date by the time it even appeared. I probably should have just shelved and binned the whole thing and not bothered. I also think that by the time Floor 81 did finally come out, obviously there'd been some other comp LPs, because people had the same idea with me at the same time and managed to get it out quicker. So Carl at Words of Warning had done Mind Pollution, which was a great comp LP, and I remember Steve Cotton had done one called Liberty as well, which was another great comp LP. So I'd probably say that if you're looking for a snapshot of like the 1990-1991 UK punk scene, perhaps check those ones out first. Another interesting thing, which I can't really give you an answer for, is why Floor 81 came out and had so few Boss Tuneage bands who I'd released stuff by actually on it. I think that Goober Patrol hadn't recorded Dutch Ovens and didn't really want something from Truck Off, and we probably didn't have the DAT tape back from when it had been pressed. Vehicle Derek had split up, so you know, any idea to put them on went by the wayside. I think we'd actually sent their master out. We had got their master back, but we sent it out to somewhere else for another compilation LP, so we didn't have that to hand. Damage, again, you know, it would have been the ideal time to put the demo on, but I'd lost touch with the band by then, I think. So it's only really Wanton Thought and Wordbug at that point who actually appear on there. So yeah, it was a bit of an odd one if I was kind of trying to say, you know, here's Boss Tuneage and here's what we're all about, that hardly any of the bands on the label were actually on the comp LP. I do remember that when I kind of started up Boss Tuneage again in 1999, I still had about 400 Floor 81s left, and luckily Kaza, my great friend in Japan, came to my rescue and basically sold most of them, which kind of, you know, kick-started off. But it did lead to a lot of problems with the label moving forward, because not only were we finding that, you know, I wasn't getting money back on the releases we'd already done, but this one just didn't sell, and I needed to kind of sell it to pay for the next release. And it did delay slightly the Dutch Ovens album by Goobertron. I think I had to borrow money from like my parents, and also Bruce, who was like a roadie guy that the guys from Goobertron knew, to actually pay for Dutch Ovens, because I just didn't have the money being a student as well. And that's where Floor 81 probably is the reason why the label started to struggle and started to fizzle out. And yeah, so you live and learn, as they say. But hope you found that enjoyable, and I'll see you on the next video.